Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Automation Tech Talk lunchtime edition. You may hear some background noise because today I have a special guest on. It's Brandon Cooper, who you probably all know has written a bunch of articles over at the Automation blog. And I've actually had Brandon on the Automation podcast back on episode 106. That was in 2022. Brandon, thank you for agreeing to share your lunch with us.
Hey, glad to do it. Glad to do it. Thanks for having
And
me.
thank you. And I was telling Brandon in the pre-show, he's actually sitting in his backyard in Louisiana, and it just sounds awesome. He's got birds chirping, and it just sounds so great. It's like, man, that's so relaxing. But in any case, let me see, Brandon,
We
you
dipped
are
into
a
the 80s this week, so it's almost fall in Louisiana.
yeah, 80s. We got into the 70s. I had to put the heat on this morning because it was in the 60s, which is kind of odd for late August. How about you
Yeah.
guys? Is this normal for late August or?
Uh, Not really. We usually don't get into the 80s until sometime in September, but we got a lower temp week this week, so it's nice.
Yeah, I'm not complaining at all. um, so you are a senior process control engineer, and I know you from your what you do with PLCs, but you also work on a lot of DCS systems, or what would classically be called a DCS. Um, and like I said, Brandon was on in episode 106. He's written several articles on Rockwell and Siemens. His latest one was on simulating E3s, I think, for migration purposes. And he also wrote two articles recently on the things I've learned because change. And I don't want you to give away the actual companies you worked for, but describe your old role and the new role you've been doing now to give the audience some perspective on kind of how you changed roles.
So I guess for 22 years, starting at 19 years old, I joined on as basically a process control type technician, and then moved up to a process control engineer, and then a senior engineer later. Working in specific facilities. Doing the day-to-day programming and graphics and troubleshooting, and working with operations at a facility, which was also being on call 24/7 for all those 22 years. So it was great. I learned a lot, and helped me get to the next step, I guess. So 3 years ago, I had the opportunity to take a job where we travel around and do things in different sites, and there's like a capital project type role, and that's been really good. I've enjoyed it, learned a lot more, and just a different role. Kids are kind of grown now, so they didn't need me at home as much anymore. So just a lot of things fell into place about the same time, and decided to do something a little different. So here
Yeah, I
we are.
can definitely see the appeal to that. So Brandon works. We're not going to get into company names, but Brandon works for a major Fortune 500 company, and those companies they have big manufacturing facilities throughout the world, and they usually have their own people, their own techs and electricians on site. But Brandon gets to come in and do the big projects, and it sounds like the fun stuff, but it could also be like mission critical stuff. And so you're traveling a lot. You're not reporting to the same place every day. You're reporting. Do you often like every month? Are you somewhere new?
Um, I tend to get on projects. I might handle 3 or 4 projects at a time, different sites, and probably different phases of those projects. So one might be scoping out, phase one, and um, getting together what we might be um, putting together a scope and deliverables and that sort of thing. And then the other project might be in execution next month. So um, and that might be from Florida to Oregon. So um, traveling a lot for certain periods, and um, different phases. Like I say, different project phases require different attention.
I wanted to ask you about, so from a PLC background, I've never used Emerson's Delta V. but I believe you've used it quite a bit, right, in different places.
Yeah, I've used Emerson some over the years. I've not used their PLCs a whole lot. Their Delta V DCS system I have
Okay.
used some.
So you were telling me recently, and I know you're not a representative for Emerson. We've had Emerson on the show. We constantly invite Emerson to come back on the show to talk about these products. But just as somebody in the field there, you've heard about something new coming out, and it's called the Delta V IQ. Again, this is all just customer impressions, but can you
Yeah,
share your impressions of what you're hearing through the grapevine about this new product that's coming?
yeah. So um, Emerson is kind of, I believe they're doing a really good job, cutting edge, trying to jump on the Ethernet bandwagon of I call it bandwagon. It's Ethernet protocols all the way through the system. So that's virtualization for servers and op systems, as well as their controllers. Their new IQ controller that I believe is coming out in version 16. That's supposed to be released later this year. The IQ can be is a totally virtual controller that has double the capacity of their previous PK controller,
Wow.
3,000 DSTs, I believe.
Wow.
I think you can have 13 IQ controllers on a virtual system, so that's like 30,000 DST points.
Wow.
Quite impressive technology there. That's using Charms IO on their network, and then they're also playing in the instrumentation world with the Ethernet APL. So theoretically, in a few years, there's still a lot of things out there that are coming and all that, but you could have a totally virtual system, totally Ethernet system from instrumentation all the way to your controllers to your servers and workstations and everything. So I think I think that's on its way.
Yeah, I think on the Rockwell side, we saw Ethernet was going to really be the thing, right?
Right.
And I think that was, we saw this become, and I recently talked about the generations of control logics or compact logics, I should say. And with the 53 35E, right? So the L35E and the L32E, those products also came out with an L32C and an L35C. And, there was a L31 serial, which I never knew anybody who was happy with that because of the speed. It's slow, right? Because
Right.
the communications is slow. But in any case, when those products launched, right, and I think it was, and I'd have to go back to the automation blog, but I think we're talking like 2004, 2005. What really became obvious is that the 35E and the 32E outsold the Cs by a ton, right? It's like the age of Ethernet is here, and Ethernet IO is here because nobody's buying the control net version. And so, when the 5370s came out, they were 100% Ethernet. And so I think we can go back 20 years and say Ethernet has won the field bus. And of course, there's different protocols. We have Ethernet,
Right.
we have a Profinet. We just had a Profinet expert on talking about Profinet. We've had multiple Profinet experts on talking about it. And, there's other, you still have Modbus TCP, which I know I just talked to Schneider. Even their latest product supports Ethernet IP and Modbus TCP, right?
Right.
So, there's that legacy as well, which is great because, I don't like it when a vendor stops supporting the older stuff, right? It's nice to have that. I don't know how, I don't, this is a brand new product from Schneider. So it's a matter of fact, I got a box of them right here. Here's the packing slip. I'm working on doing a show and tell on a brand new next gen IO. And I mean, this stuff is truly next gen. It's just not a paintbrush, to make it look new. But in any case, with Ethernet having won, there's still topology challenges with our standard Ethernet, right? And I think that's where single pair Ethernet and Ethernet APL can really take us to the next level. And then, aside from that, we also have the virtualization and where we see that. And you know, I mean, in your business, not to talk about company specifics, where do you think virtualized PLCs would work and where they wouldn't work? Right? I mean, I could definitely see some applications where they wouldn't be a good fit.
Yeah, certainly. Right off the top of my head, safety systems, high speed, critical, um, guarding, anything like that. I would certainly say you won't see that anytime soon, or if ever. Um, but I think overall process control systems, I don't see any reason that in the next 5 to 10 years you won't see that largely implemented, because the speed and the capability and everything you're doing in a virtual system, you're relying on it already for all your servers and op stations and things like that. The controller living in that same system is probably in a better environment than it was in the field. So while it might be slow to adopt, it's certainly a viable solution in the very near future, I believe.
Yeah, you bring up a good point too, because with a lot of process control systems, you can't operate the system without your SCADA or HMI or user interface, right? There's not a lot of discrete standalone parts that can run totally separate. So if your main console and all your screens go down, you can't operate it. And so in a lot of those cases, the PLC or DCS, the main brain is installed in the control room. And so if you're installing the brains in the control room anyways, can it be virtualized on some hardened, redundant hardware versus like we do with SCADA today, versus being a brick? And I think the advantage, though, of having a hardware PLC is you can swap it out. The PLC dies, you swap it out. Where if you're going with a virtual PLC, now you're relying on the computer IT people to keep that robust and up and running. I think there's probably quite a few standalone, and I don't know if you have any examples, but I'm sure there's a lot of standalone applications in your facilities and others you've worked in where you don't want to, if you lose a connection to the main control room, you don't want to stop. You don't want to stop production, whether it be palletizing, material handling, shrink wrapping. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of things that are standalone. Like if the whole front office went away, this machine still has to run. Do you think I'm right about that?
Yeah, absolutely. You've always got to have those critical systems that are isolated and have to be, whether they can talk to the rest of the world or not, they have to run. So there will always be places that you would stay away from going totally virtual, I believe. But I believe the overall system, I don't see it as a problem to go in that direction.
How about Ethernet APL? What are you seeing on that side? What do you think the promise is there from the process perspective?
So I guess what they're calling Gen 1, it has been out several years. I believe Enders Hauser is leading that quite a bit, and along with a lot of other companies, Emerson, a lot of other companies are playing in that world, and it's developing. I think there's some instrumentation out there, but I don't know that there's enough instrumentation released compatible to say, do a whole facility at the moment. Now, I have read about some facilities, I believe in South America, that have gone in that direction, and are making it work, but I don't know that it's all the way there. I believe, like I say, I can't speak for Emerson or anybody else, but yeah. I know that they're looking at some Gen 2 opportunities where, getting away from the Gen 1, which was like switches with APL Ethernet switches that had, 20 devices plugged into it. They're looking at more of a one-to-one Ethernet APL charm or connection that would provide a little more robustness than having a single point of failure for 20 plus devices.
I want to throw out an invite too to whether it's Emerson or Andreas Hauser. We've had them both on the show, the Automation Podcast. Love to put an invite out there for them to give us an update on Ethernet APL. We've followed it quite closely, especially when I was doing the news. Just all the different people who jumped on it, all the big players. I mean, pretty much everybody's jumped onto it now, but we'd love to get those vendors on to tell us what they're doing in that area and, and give us more information about that. Is there anything, Brandon, that you came across that was like an aha moment, like whether it was programming a PLC or a DCS system? Think back over the last month or two. Any tips you can share with the audience that maybe, you found a version didn't do something, or there was a feature in this that did something extra? Any knowledge, or even if it has to do with your life of traveling, any tips you have for the audience from going from like being landlocked to being this world traveler?
Whew. That's a wide open question. So you mentioned protocols a minute ago, and Modbus, TCP, and Ethernet IP, and all those things. Whether it's Delta V, whether it's Honeywell, whether it's Rockwell, what I'm finding is that every time I go to scope something, there's 10 different ways that I can, topology-wise, that I can make this work. And trying to come up with standards and repeat ways of doing things that are, there might be 3 ways that are all good options, but trying to figure out the best way, whether that's, like I say, every vendor's got the capabilities to talk both. Say, let's just pick on Honeywell for a minute, and their EIM module, their C300 to EIM module, it'll talk Modbus TCP or Ethernet IP, depending on, you got to flash it one way or the other, and you can't do both at the same time. But, looking at those devices and trying to figure out the best way to handle, a third-party integration or smart MCC, another PLC, whatever the case, there's just so many options and so many protocols, PRP, DLR, you name it. There's lots of options for everything you do, and just trying to come up with those standards helps to not have to reinvent that wheel the next time.
I know Rockwell, and I think all vendors do this, but I'm more familiar with the Rockwell examples where they have these, they almost look like graph paper, but they're example configurations. And I used to love to use those to show people, this is what you would do in this situation. So if you had a servo application, here's the products that are recommended. If you have lots of VFDs, here's the networks recommended. Here's the topology recommended. And I think it's good when vendors do that because, like you said, they all have so many options, right? And guidance. You need to give guidance. Like Siemens they have basic modules, they have standard modules, they have 5 functionality modules, right? And it's like, all right, so is it just price? I mean, why am I choosing one or the other, right? And so having that type of guidance from the vendors is always extremely helpful. I think, for me, if I had to choose between Ethernet IP and Modbus TCP, I'd pick Ethernet IP because, it's a generational difference in development, right? So you got Modbus TCP when it came out versus Ethernet IP, Profinet, and the other big guys up there on the field buses. But then you could limit yourself something because a lot of old products don't talk Ethernet IP, and a lot of vendors, they like the openness of Modbus TCP, so they can just implement it with not too much hassle. Don't have to join a group, don't have to get a spec, and so on. So yeah, that's a good point. Hey, I may be traveling out across the country here in a couple months for a sponsored engagement. And I wanted to ask you any advice for somebody who hasn't been traveling a lot. Since you're traveling an awful lot, what would be like your top couple of things? And I do have one of the ones you recommended. I do have TSA pre-check, which I am a big fan of. This is something my wife talked me into getting, and I love the shorter lines. I love leaving my shoes on. I love all of that. But other thoughts that you have um, on just making the traveling, and since you're traveling so much, what would you recommend?
So yeah, I talked about several things as far in my articles, but I would say in article number two, probably taking care of yourself is a big thing for trying to eat healthy, exercise a little bit, things like that. When you're on the road, when you do it week after week after week, the choices you make will either benefit your life or take their toll. And I guess I've learned some of those things the hard way. Um, and then also, just on the upside of traveling a lot, hey, collect your points and get those. That's your choice. I'm not advocating for Hilton or Holiday Inn or Marriott, any of them, but you pick your where you like to stay and collect those points, and then use them later on your personal vacation.
Yeah, that's a good point. It makes sense to choose one company to get all your points with because I know a lot of people have taken personal vacations for free because they get so many points for work. So that's really good advice. Um, before we close out the show, I did want to let everybody know there's no show tomorrow and there's no show Monday because Monday in the United States is a holiday. So we'll be back on Tuesday. I got another guest on who's going to talk about a totally different subject. So I'm hoping you guys will enjoy that episode as well. Of course, I hope you enjoyed our time we spent with Brandon, and I'm really wish I was in his backyard right now with all the birds and it just seems like such a quiet, peaceful place. But with that, Brandon, we're coming to the end of the show. Was there anything else you wanted to share with the audience before we close out the show?
Not that I can think of, but hey, I've been listening to your lunchtime show here lately, and enjoy it, and I appreciate you doing it because it's a good way to get tips while you're eating your lunch. So appreciate it, Sean.
Well, I thank you, Brandon, and I would like to ask everybody if there's something you want to know or see. We did have somebody say, "How do I connect Factory Talk View to a Micro 800?" So I'll be trying to do that next week. I think before I do that, I'm going to roll in how to convert. And I think you and I both wrote articles on this, but I'm going to roll in how to convert a MicroLogix project to a Micro 800
Yeah.
because in my Factory Talk View course, I do everything but Micro 800 just because of time. It was just so time consuming creating a course that just for time I left it out. But I'm figuring, hey, I might as well add it now because I'm always adding lessons to my courses. So in any case, if anybody wants to see the courses I have available, theautomationschool.com. With that, Brandon, thank you so much, not only for coming on the lunchtime show today, but for all the articles you've shared with the audience over at the Automation blog. And again, if you have any tips or ideas, we'd love to have you submit them or even come back on the show and share them with the audience.
Sounds good. Thank you, Sean.
All right. And I'm going to say goodbye to everybody on the live stream. Hope you guys have a great day. Again, I'm not on tomorrow or Monday. So have a great weekend. And until next time, I should probably go full screen. That's full screen of Brandon. That's not full screen of me. Let me try that again. Until next time, my friends. Peace.